The mansion on the hill was quiet, wrapped in golden light that faded through tall glass windows. Inside, Madame Eveline Duval, a woman once envied by all of Paris, sat alone at a long dining table covered in silver plates she no longer cared to use. Her wealth filled the rooms, paintings, marble floors, chandeliers, but none of it filled the silence that had grown too heavy for her heart. She had everything, yet nothing that mattered. The sound of a clock ticking was her only companion. Eveline had been loved once years ago. Her husband, Henri, had died young, leaving behind only fortune and memories. She told herself she didn't need anyone, that money could keep her safe. But each night, as the wind howled outside, she realized the walls of gold were her prison. The loneliness inside her grew like ivy, wrapping tighter each passing day. In the nearby town, children played by the bakery, laughter echoing through the streets. Eveline sometimes watched from her car window, wishing for a sound like that in her home again. She had no family left, no friends who visited, only servants who came and went in silence. That emptiness began whispering strange thoughts to her heart, dark, desperate thoughts that no one could imagine a woman like her thinking. One evening, while driving alone through a small road, Eveline saw a young boy walking barefoot, holding a bag of bread. His clothes were torn, his face tired. He reminded her of the son she never had. She stopped her car beside him, her heart racing for reasons she didn't understand. "Do you need a ride, little one?" she asked softly, smiling through the open window. The boy hesitated, looking unsure. She promised safety, warmth, food, and everything he had never known. And when he finally stepped into her car, Eveline's heart began to feel alive again, but in a way that would soon destroy everything she had left. The boy's name was Juliana, a thin, quiet child with brown curls and eyes that held more sadness than youth. Eveline learned his name as they drove through winding roads back toward her mansion. He barely spoke, his voice trembling when she asked where his parents were. "They're gone," he murmured, staring at his hands. She didn't ask more. Something about that answer stirred an ache deep inside her, a motherly ache she thought had long died. The silence between them was heavy, yet Eveline felt an unfamiliar warmth returning to her heart. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. When they arrived, Eveline led Julien into the grand hall. The boy froze, eyes wide at the sight of chandeliers and marble pillars. "This will be your home now," she said gently. Her voice shook as though she were convincing herself as much as him. Servants stared in confusion but didn't question her. That night, Eveline ordered the cook to prepare a feast. Julien ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days. Eveline watched him silently, smiling for the first time in years, though her smile was painted over a storm she didn't yet understand. Days turned into weeks. Eveline began treating Julien like a treasure she could not lose. She bought him new clothes, toys, books, and everything a child could dream of. But her kindness came with an invisible chain. She wouldn't let him leave the mansion no matter how much he asked. "The world outside is cruel," she'd whisper. "You're safe here with me." Julien believed her at first. But soon he began to realize that the golden walls were not protecting high, they were keeping him. Eveline's loneliness had turned to obsession, and though she smiled, her eyes carried a strange darkness. Every night, she'd sit beside him as he slept, brushing his hair with trembling hands. "You're all I have," she'd whisper, her tears falling silently. Julien didn't understand her pain. He was too young to see the madness in her love. He only felt trapped. He missed the smell of bread from the bakery, the laughter of other children. Eveline's mansion, though beautiful, felt like a golden cage. Outside, the town began to whisper. The baker's wife had noticed Julien's disappearance. Others spoke of a boy last seen walking near the forest road. Rumors grew, and the whispers reached the ears of a young policeman named Armand Lefebvre, a man whose curiosity and compassion would one day bring the truth to light. But for now, the lonely woman in the mansion slept peacefully, believing that keeping Julien close had finally filled the emptiness inside her heart, unaware that her own choices were slowly destroying her soul. The garden behind Eveline's mansion had once been filled with roses. Her late husband Henri had planted them for her when they first moved in, saying, "So you'll always have beauty to wake up to." But now only thorns remained overgrown and dry. Eveline rarely went outside until Julien arrived. With him in her home, the garden came alive again. She watched him play near the fountains, chasing butterflies and laughing softly to himself. That laughter was like music she hadn't heard in years, and it made her believe for a moment that life had returned to her lonely heart. But as the days passed, the joy she felt began to twist into something darker. Eveline's love for Julien was no longer the love of a mother. It was desperate, possessive, and selfish. She feared losing him more than she feared the truth about herself. Every time Julian mentioned wanting to go outside, to walk by the bakery or see the river again, Evelyn's face would tighten. "No, my dear," she'd say with forced calm. "The world out there will hurt you. Here you have everything." But deep inside, she wasn't protecting him, she was protecting her loneliness from returning. Julian started to change. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed. He spent hours staring through the window, watching the birds fly freely beyond the garden walls. One evening, when Evelyn came to call him for dinner, she found him sitting on the cold floor beside the door, whispering to himself, "They must be looking for me." Evelyn froze. The words pierced her like a knife. Fear and guilt swirled within her heart, but she pushed them away. "No one is looking for you," she said too quickly, her voice breaking. "You're mine now, Julian. Mine." That night, the wind howled fiercely outside, rattling the mansion's tall windows. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She walked through the halls, haunted by her own reflection in the mirrors, her face pale, her eyes tired, her lips trembling from lies she no longer believed. She stopped at Julian's room, opened the door quietly, and watched him sleep. His small hand clutched the blanket like a child, lost in a storm. Evelyn's tears returned, burning her cheeks. She whispered, "Please don't leave me too." But outside the mansion, the whispers in the village grew louder. The baker's wife had gone to the police station again, begging them to find the missing boy. Officer Armand Lefebvre began searching old records, tracing every lead. His instincts told him something was wrong near the mansion on the hill. As the moonlight faded and morning crept in, Evelyn still sat by Julian's bed, her heart trapped between guilt and obsession, love and madness, unaware that the peace she thought she had found was about to crumble forever. The town of St. Clair was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. When Julian vanished, it was as if the whole town had lost a piece of its heart. His laughter had once filled the streets, and now, only silence remained near the bakery. The baker's wife, Madame Lucille, refused to stop searching. Each morning, she pinned the boy's picture to the church door, praying that someone would come forward with answers. "He's out there," she told her husband. "I can feel it." But as weeks passed, hope began to fade. Only one man still believed, the young policeman, Armand Lefebvre. Armand was new to the force, but he had a sharp mind and a heart that couldn't rest when something felt wrong. Late one night, as he reviewed the missing child reports, one detail caught his attention. Julian was last seen walking down the old forest road, the same road leading to Eveline Duval's mansion. He remembered the stories his father used to tell him about the reclusive widow who lived there alone. No one ever visited. No one ever left. Armand's instincts began to stir. He decided to see for himself what secrets that mansion might hold. Meanwhile, inside those golden walls, Evelyn sat by the piano as Julian played a simple tune she had taught him. His small hands moved gently over the keys and his voice hummed softly. The melody filled the house with something almost beautiful. But behind that beauty, Evelyn's heart was breaking. She could see the sadness in Julian's eyes. He was no longer the happy boy she brought home. Each smile he gave her seemed forced, polite. Deep inside, she knew he missed the world she had stolen from him. Still, she couldn't let him go. "Play again," she said quietly. "For me." Her voice trembled with need. Julian obeyed, though his eyes stayed fixed on the window where a single bird perched on the ledge. As he played, he whispered to himself, "One day I'll go home." Evelyn froze. The sound of those words cracked something deep within her chest. She rose from her chair and clutched the piano edge, her mind spinning. "You are home," she said, almost shouting. Julian's hand stopped. The room went silent except for Evelyn's heavy breathing. Tears welled in her eyes. She turned away, ashamed of her outburst, but her fear of losing him burned stronger than ever. Outside, Armand walked through the forest path with a lantern in hand, its golden glow lighting his steps. The air was cold, the night quiet. As he reached the edge of Evelyn's estate, he stopped. Through the trees, he saw the mansion, tall, dark, and silent, its windows faintly glowing. Something about that sight sent a chill down his spine. He whispered to himself, "If the boy is anywhere, it's there." And as the wind blew across the empty hills, the story of the lonely woman and the lost child began to move toward the moment when truth could no longer hide behind gold and silence. The following morning dawned bright, the sky painted in soft shades of gold. Inside the mansion, Evelyn poured tea at the long dining table while Julian sat quietly across from her. The boy barely touched his food anymore. His eyes looked dull, distant, like a soul fading behind glass. Evelyn noticed, but she forced a smile, pretending everything was normal. "You must eat, my dear," she said gently. "You're growing." Julian nodded weakly. The sound of silverware against porcelain filled the silence between them like a haunting rhythm. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. She could feel his distance, his silent wish to be free, and it terrified her more than anything. Outside, at the end of the long driveway, Armand Lefebvre stood at the mansion gate. His uniform was neat, his expression calm, but his eyes were sharp with purpose. He looked around. The estate was too quiet for a home that size. Not even a gardener was in sight. He pressed the bell. The faint chime echoed through the grand hall. Evelyn froze mid-sip. No one ever came to visit. Her heart began to pound. "Stay here," she whispered to Julien, rising from her chair. The boy watched her go, fear flickering in his eyes. When Evelyn opened the large oak doors, Armand greeted her with a respectful nod. "Good morning, Madame Duval," he said politely. "I'm Officer Armand Lefebvre from the St. Clair Police. I'm following up on a missing child case. May I ask if you've seen a young boy in the area recently?" Evelyn's throat went dry. Her face remained calm, but her palms grew cold with sweat. "A missing child?" she repeated, forcing a small smile. "How dreadful. No, officer, I rarely leave my home. I live a quiet life here." Armand studied her face closely. Something about her voice, too controlled, too careful, made him uneasy. He glanced past her shoulder into the vast hallway. For a moment he thought he heard faint footsteps. "Do you live alone, madam?" he asked casually. Evelyn hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "I have servants, but they are away today." Armand nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on her trembling hands. "If you happen to remember anything at all, please contact me," he said, handing her his card. Evelyn took it slowly, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "Of course, officer. I'll do that." She closed the door gently, then pressed her back against it, breathing hard. From the corner of the hall, Julien stood quietly watching. He had heard the man's voice and seen the badge. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered inside his chest. Evelyn turned and saw the one she feared most. "Julien," she said shakily, walking toward him. "You must never speak to strangers. Do you understand?" The boy didn't answer. His eyes said everything. That small spark of freedom she saw in him made Evelyn's heart twist painfully. She whispered to herself, "I can't lose him again." Outside, Armand walked back toward town, his instincts whispering louder now. Something wasn't right about that mansion, and he was determined to uncover the truth. That night, the wind carried the sound of distant thunder over the hills. The mansion stood in darkness, the only light coming from a candle flickering in Evelyn's study. She sat at her desk, staring at the officer's card. The name Armand Lefebvre seemed to echo in her mind. Her heart wouldn't calm. She could still hear his voice at the door, polite but sharp, questioning. What if he came back? What if he took Julien away? The thought made her stomach twist. She picked up the candle and walked toward the corridor leading to Julien's room, her steps slow, heavy, trembling. Julien lay on his bed, wide awake. He had not slept since the officer's visit. For the first time he realized someone was looking for him. Hope, fragile but alive, beat faintly in his chest. When Evelyn entered, he turned away, pretending to sleep. She stood by the door, watching his small frame under the blanket. "You're safe here," she whispered. "You'll always be safe with me." Her voice cracked as she said the words. She wanted to believe them, but deep down she knew she wasn't saving him, she was keeping him prisoner. A tear slid down her cheek as she turned the key in the lock. The click echoed through the silent room. The next morning, Julien tried the handle, but it wouldn't move. The door was locked from outside. His small fist hit the wood, but no one answered. "Madame Evelyn?" he called softly at first, then louder. "Please open the door." The sound broke her heart, yet she didn't move. She sat in the hallway, back against the wall, eyes filled with tears. She whispered to herself, "He'll thank me one day. I'm protecting him from a cruel world." But those words rang hollow. Even she no longer believed them. Outside, in the town below, Officer Armand returned to his desk. Something about Madame Duval's mansion haunted his thoughts. Her eyes, empty yet restless, had told him more than her words. He began to dig deeper. Through old property records, he learned she had once lost a child years ago, her only son, who had died young. That discovery hit him like lightning. "So that's why," he muttered. "She's trying to fill the void she never healed from." But sympathy didn't erase suspicion. Armand decided he would visit again, this time unannounced. As the rain began to fall over the mansion, Evelyn stood outside Julien's locked door, pressing her trembling hand against it. Inside, the boy sat on the floor, tears rolling silently down his face. He wasn't angry anymore, just afraid. "Please," he whispered through the wood. "I just want to go home." Eveline closed her eyes and whispered back, "You are home." But her voice broke. Even she could hear the lie in her own words. Somewhere deep inside, she knew the truth was coming for her, and when it did, it would destroy everything she had tried so desperately to hold on to. The storm outside grew wild that night. Lightning split the sky, thunder roared over the mansion, and rain lashed against the tall windows. Eveline sat by the fire, her face pale and tired. The crackle of burning wood filled the silence, but even that could not drown out the echo of Julian's cries from behind the locked door. Every sound, every soft plea for freedom stabbed through her heart. "He'll understand one day," she whispered, rocking slightly in her chair. "He'll see I did it for love." But her reflection in the firelight told another story, a broken woman trapped by her own loneliness. Julian lay curled up on the cold floor, his small hands pressed to his chest. He no longer cried loudly, his voice had gone weak. He whispered prayers instead of simple ones, the kind a lost child would say. "Please help me. Please let me go home." The sound of thunder made him flinch, and for a moment he thought he heard something else. A faint knock far away at the main door. His heart raced. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was the officer. Julian pressed his ear to the floor, listening for footsteps. And then, faintly, he heard voices in the hall. Eveline's heart leaped when the bell rang again. She stood, trembling. Lightning flashed through the windows as she walked toward the door. When she opened it, Officer Armand stood before her, soaked, serious, determined. "Good evening, Madame Duval," he said firmly. "I'm sorry to disturb you again. May I come in?" Eveline hesitated. Her breath caught in her throat. "It's late, officer," she said quietly. "Surely this could wait." Armand's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid it can't." She stepped aside slowly, knowing she couldn't refuse. He entered, his boots dripping water onto the marble floor. Armand's eyes scanned the room, the spotless furniture, the perfect order, the eerie stillness. "It's a beautiful home," he said softly. "But it feels empty." Eveline forced a smile, though her hands shook. "I like peace," she whispered. Armand looked toward the hallway, where he thought he heard a faint sound, something like a child's voice. His pulse quickened. "Do you live here all alone?" he asked again, watching her closely. Eveline froze for a moment too long. Her silence gave him his answer. "Madam," he said quietly, "please don't lie to me." Before she could speak, another sound broke through the unmistakable sound of a child coughing from behind a door upstairs. Armand's eyes locked onto hers. "Who is that?" he demanded. Eveline's face went white. For a moment the world stood still. Then, without a word, she turned and ran toward the staircase, tears spilling down her cheeks. Armand followed, his boots thudding against the floor as thunder roared outside. Julian's weak voice called again from behind the locked door. "Help me. Please." When Armand reached the top of the stairs, he saw Eveline kneeling before the door, clutching the key in trembling hands. "He's mine," she cried. "You don't understand, I just wanted to love him. I just wanted someone to stay." Armand's voice softened. "Madame Duval," he said gently but firmly, "love doesn't take away someone's freedom. It gives it." Her hands shook violently, the key slipping from her fingers. She broke down, sobbing. Armand knelt beside her and took the key. The sound of the lock turning echoed through the hall like a final confession. The door opened slowly. Julian looked up, weak and pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. When he saw Armand, he burst into tears, not from fear, but relief. The officer lifted him gently into his arms. Eveline reached out, her fingers trembling. "Julian," she whispered. But the boy turned away, burying his face in Armand's shoulder. Eveline's heart shattered into silence. Outside, the storm began to fade, and the first light of dawn crept over the mansion, revealing not gold and beauty, but the emptiness that had always lived inside. The next morning arrived quietly, the storm having left the air clean but heavy with sorrow. The mansion on the hill stood still, wrapped in a strange calm, as if the house itself had been holding its breath through the night. Eveline Duval sat on the marble staircase, her silk gown torn, her hair loose around her face. Her eyes stared blankly ahead. She didn't cry anymore, the tears had dried hours ago. In the hallway nearby, two policemen moved quietly, speaking in low voices. Officer Armand stood by the door, watching as Julian was wrapped in a warm blanket and led gently outside. Julian turned once, looking back at the grand house that had been both a home and a prison. His face was pale, his lips trembling, but there was a flicker of strength in his eyes. He was free, but that freedom came with memories he would never forget. When he looked at Eveline sitting on the stairs, His small heart ached with confusion. He didn't understand why she had done what she did. He only knew that she wasn't evil, just broken. "Goodbye," he whispered softly. She didn't answer. She only lowered her head, her hands shaking in her lap. Armand walked toward her slowly. "Madame Duval," he said quietly, "you'll need to come with us." His voice was firm but not cruel. Eveline didn't resist. She stood slowly, the hem of her gown brushing the steps like a ghost moving through air. "Where are you taking me?" she asked faintly. "To the station," Armand replied. "You'll have a fair hearing." She nodded, her face expressionless. As the officers led her to the waiting car, she looked once more toward Julien. He was sitting in the police carriage, holding a small toy she had once given him, a wooden horse. The sight made her heart crumble all over again. As the car drove down the long driveway, Eveline pressed her forehead to the window. The roses outside were blooming again, wet from the rain. They looked beautiful, too beautiful for such a sad morning. Her voice was a whisper lost to the wind. "Henri," she murmured, speaking to her late husband, "I just wanted to love again, but I didn't know how." The mansion grew smaller and smaller until it vanished completely behind the fog. For the first time she truly felt how empty her world had been. Not because she had lost Julien, but because she had lost herself long before he came. Down in the town square, people gathered as word spread that the missing boy had been found. Madame Lucille, the baker's wife, wept with relief when Julien was brought to her. She wrapped him in her arms, whispering prayers of thanks. Officer Armand stood at a distance, watching quietly. His heart was heavy, but he felt a strange peace. Justice had been served, but not through anger, through truth. He looked up toward the hill, where the mansion sat in silence once more. He knew Eveline's story would haunt him forever, not as a tale of crime, but as a lesson of what loneliness can turn a heart into when love is lost and never healed. The courtroom was filled with a cold, heavy silence. The polished wooden benches creaked as townspeople leaned forward, their faces curious, shocked, and sorrowful. Eveline Duval sat quietly beside her lawyer, dressed in a plain gray gown. Gone was the elegance that once followed her. Her beauty was still there, but it looked faded like a flower that had wilted from neglect. In front of her, the judge adjusted his glasses and looked over the papers on his desk. "Madame Duval," he said softly, "do you understand the charges against you?" Eveline nodded weakly. Her voice was faint when she replied, "Yes, Your Honor. I took him. I kept him. I just wanted someone to love me." Murmurs spread through the crowd, but they weren't filled with anger. They carried sorrow. Everyone knew her story, the death of her husband, the years of silence, and the emptiness that had consumed her heart. Her actions were unforgivable, yet her pain was undeniable. Officer Armand sat in the back row watching her closely. He had seen many criminals, but Eveline wasn't one. She was a broken woman who had lost her way. He felt both pity and sadness as the prosecutor described the case. When Eveline's lawyer stood, his voice trembled as he spoke. "My client did not harm the boy. She fed him, cared for him, and kept him safe. Her crime was not cruelty, it was despair." When Julien entered the courtroom, the entire room turned silent. The little boy was dressed neatly in a white shirt and dark trousers. He looked nervous but calm. His aunt held his hand as he walked toward the witness stand. When asked if Eveline had ever hurt him, he shook his head. "She cried a lot," he said softly. "She told me I reminded her of someone she lost." The judge's eyes softened, and even the prosecutor paused before asking his next question. "Did you want to go home?" Julien hesitated, his small hands twisting together. "Yes," he whispered, "but I also wanted her to stop crying." His words struck every heart in that room like a quiet bell. Eveline's tears finally fell, silent but endless. For the first time since her arrest, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done, not from guilt alone, but from grief. She had stolen a child's freedom because she couldn't face her loneliness. When the judge finally gave his verdict, his voice was solemn but kind. "Madame Duval," he said, "you must face the consequences of your actions. Yet, this court recognizes that you are not beyond redemption. You will serve time, but I hope you find peace within yourself." The gavel struck once, echoing through the hall like a farewell. As the guards led Eveline away, she glanced back at Julien one last time. Their eyes met for a moment that felt eternal. There was no hatred in his gaze, only sadness and forgiveness. "Goodbye, my little one," she whispered, though her lips barely moved. Julien watched her go, clutching the small wooden horse she had once carved for him. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, washing the gray walls of the courthouse in gold. It was as if the heavens themselves were reminding them both that even the darkest hearts could still find light. 10 years passed, and the mansion on the hill no longer belonged to Eveline Duval. Its walls had faded, vines crawling over the once beautiful balconies. The town below had changed to new faces, new shops, new stories. But one story still lingered in whispers, spoken softly among the old townspeople. The woman who lost everything because of loneliness. Eveline had served her sentence quietly. She never protested, never wept in front of others. In prison, she spent her days writing letters she never sent. Julian, now a young man, had grown kind and thoughtful. Though life hadn't been easy, he was determined to make something of himself. He often helped at the town orphanage, teaching younger children how to read. But there were nights when he would look out the window toward the distant hill, remembering the woman who had taken him. He no longer felt fear or anger. Instead, he felt a deep sadness, the kind that comes from understanding too late that pain can make people do terrible things. In his heart, he had already forgiven her long ago. One autumn afternoon, Julian received a letter written in trembling handwriting. The paper was yellowed, the ink faint. It was from Eveline. The letter was simple, just a few lines that read, "My dear Julian, if you are reading this, I am near my end. I'm sorry for everything. You were never meant to suffer for my emptiness. You reminded me that love, when forced, becomes pain. I only wish I could have learned sooner. Eveline Duval." Tears filled Julian's eyes as he folded the paper carefully and placed it close to his heart. A week later, he visited the small graveyard outside town. The wind carried the scent of roses. He found her grave near a tree, marked with a plain stone that read, "Eveline Duval, a soul who loved too late." He knelt beside it, laying down a white rose. "You're free now," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "And so am I." For a long moment, he stayed there in silence, letting the wind brush his hair, feeling as though the world had finally found peace. As he walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the old mansion in the distance. The roses in the garden still bloomed, their petals swaying in the golden light. Eveline's story had ended, but her lesson lived on as a reminder that loneliness can destroy, but forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. Julian never spoke much about her afterward, but every year on that same day he returned with a single rose. He would stand by her grave, smile faintly and whisper, "Rest now, madam." And though no one else could hear it, somewhere in the wind, it was said that a soft voice always answered back gently, peacefully, and finally free.